So we're rolling.
Steve. All right.
Ben, all right.
So you got a new album out.
That's right. In fact, I have a copy of the LP right here.
Nice.
And you worked on it. You did the radio promotion for the Time Flies.
Yeah.
With Manuel Valera on keyboards and Yannick Guizdala on the bass. And the new incarnation of Vital Information is a trio. In the studio, we had George Garzone come in for a day. An afternoon, he played a couple of tracks on this album, Time Flies, and then he suggested, after he played on what we asked him to play on, he said, can we play the Coltrane tune, One Down and One Up? One down, one up. So we said, all right, let's just give it a go. So we did one take, and it came out great, and then we just kept going and improvised 8 other pieces and created an entire album in the course of a couple of hours. And every piece is improvised, and they were completely spontaneous in the studio, but it tells the story, and that held together as an album. So with the CD, that's a separate CD called A Prayer for the Generations, and we were really pleased that that occurred. We didn't even know it at the time. It wasn't until I mixed the album about a week later and listened to all of those improvised tracks, I realized that in the order that we played them, everything about it was just a perfect album. So, so we put that out as well, and we happened to videotape all of those tunes as well. Like we did the album in a studio in New Jersey. It's called Mozart Studio, and they have some cameras built in. And we didn't film every day, but we filmed a couple of days, including that one day with George. So all of those tunes are on video, and every tune except for like 2 at this point have been edited and are on my YouTube channel to check out.
This isn't necessarily where I was going to go with this interview, but I guess something to touch on is the idea of vital information.
Yeah.
Because this seems to be kind of your almost like nom de plume or your moniker. Like this has become sort of Steve Smith, and then the incarnation of this has been through multiple different bands, right?
That's right.
And repertoire. So maybe speak to what vital information means to you.
Yeah, what is it? So it's the first album, it was called Vital Information, came out, we recorded it in January 1983. So just for kind of a timeline perspective, I was in, the first time I played in Journey, like really with the original, let's say, classic lineup was from 78 to 85. And before Journey, I was, playing mostly jazz. I came from the Boston area, went to Berkeley, College of Music, played with a lot of musicians around there. And I knew Tim Landers, and I knew each other since high school. Tim's a great bass player. And a saxophonist named David Wilczewski, who also was from the South Shore Boston area. And we knew each other from high school years. We didn't go to high school together, but we met when we were in high school because we played in a college band that needed some extra players. So that's the beginning of Vital Information. Okay. Because even though throughout Berkeley time, we all played together, and we'd have different guitar players, sometimes Barry Finnerty or Daryl Sturmer or Dean Brown were playing with us, and like once a year we'd play around Boston. So when Tim went on tour with Al Di Meola and I went on tour with Jean-Luc Ponty, we'd still meet up and play. And I was writing tunes, and David was writing tunes, and Tim was writing tunes. So the repertoire for the first album in '83, we had actually been playing for a while. So even though I was playing with Journey, and I was still playing with my friends from Boston when I could. So that first album, has the music that the 3 of us wrote, and we had Mike Stern play guitar with us because we knew Mike well from Berkeley in Boston, and Mike was playing with Miles Davis at that time. So he played on the record, and then '83 I did the Frontiers tour with Journey, which ended in September. I took a short break and then went on the road for at least a month with the first Vital Information tour all across the US with Tim Landers, David Wilczewski, Dean Brown, and Afe Albers. And Afe took Mike Stern's place. Now, Afe Albers I had met when I did an album with Focus, the Dutch rock band Focus. And the two guitar players in the band were Philippe Cachin, great jazz guitarist, and Afe Albers, who's a bop and roller, like Mike Stern's a bop and roller, like really plays jazz, but also can inhabit that big rock bluesy sound as well. So as soon as we finished that tour, we went in the studio and recorded the second album, Orion. Since that time, I have continued to record albums every year or 2 years, and called Steve Smith and Vital Information. And the idea is I want to play with people that I enjoy playing with, enjoy making music with, and every album is a creation of the current incarnation of the band.
Okay.
You know, and so everyone can write music and contribute tunes, and in fact, a lot of times we collaborate and we write music together. And that especially started in the 90s, in the mid-90s, when I had a group with Frank Gambale, first Jeff Andrews and Tom Koster, and then Baron Brown came in after Jeff Andrews left. And we would get together for a week and write tunes for a few days, and then go in the studio and record, or just do like what we did with George Goes Home recently. We would just improvise in the studio, and that would become some of the music on the album. So I've had some great collaborators over the year, like I mentioned, like Frank Gambale, Tom Koster, and then when Frank left, Vinnie Valentino came in the band on guitar. And so it's about creating music with people that I love to play with and hang out with, and it's just an enjoyable experience. And it's, you know, I'm not writing the tunes and saying, here are the tunes. In fact, you know, I don't write as much as the other guys do, but I co-write and collaborate, and then I produce it, and then organize the tours, and we go out and play.
The incarnation of it was Scott Henderson and Victor Wooten.
That wasn't Vital Information.
That wasn't Vital Information?
No.
Okay.
So we made an album called Vital Tech Tones.
Oh, okay. That's.
And that came about. It was in that, we were talking earlier about the time period in the mid 90s, but it was in '97.
Okay.
And in '95 and '96, I was participating in this Journey reunion album called Trial by Fire.
Okay.
And it was a restrictive experience for me in that I could only play with Journey. There was a contract involved. I could only play with Journey, and we didn't do it. We just did an album, but we didn't ever do a tour. So it took about 2.5 years where I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I couldn't make a record, go on tour with my own thing. I couldn't even do drum clinics. So it was, so when that ended in 1997, Steve Perry finally decided he wasn't going to go on tour with Journey. And so Jonathan, Ross, and Neil wanted to move on and find a new lead singer. That's when I said, I'm going to just focus on my career as a jazz musician, as a band leader, as a studio sideman, session player. And the first thing that I did was that Vital Tech Tones album.
Okay.
And that came about because Mike...
in 97.
1997,
okay.
Yeah. And that was the beginning of a label called Tone Center Records.
Right.
Mike Varney, who had Shrapnel Records, which kind of a guitar shredder label, which I had played on some albums with Tony McAlpine and Richie Kotzen and I played on a few of these sort of instrumental metal records.
Yeah.
And he came to me in '97 and said, what if you could put together like a heavy kind of jazz fusion trio? Who would you ask? And I said, Scott Henderson and Victor Wooten. He said, give them a call. And we made that album in the same way, where we didn't have any material. We got together at my home studio. When I lived in Northern California, I had a home studio, and we just, in a week's time, created that whole Vital Tech Tones album, which was Vital Information meets the Tribal Tech.
The Tribal Tech, yeah,
meets
exactly.
the Flecktones.
Okay, all right, I get it.
Yeah, that was the idea. And then eventually we made a second album, but then I ended up playing on and producing 16 albums for that label.
Oh, wow.
Because then we did, then I put together a trio with Frank Gambale and Stu Ham.
Okay.
Then another trio with Larry Coryell and Tom Coster, like an organ trio. And then Larry Coryell and Steve Marcus from the Buddy Rich day. But see, Steve Marcus and Larry had played together in the 60s, in the early jazz rock years. And Kai Eckhart played bass on that. And just went on and on. I did some records with Buddy's Buddies, which was a Buddy Rich alumni band, a Vital Information record. And in a way, the most interesting album was called The Stranger's Hand with Howard Levy from the Flecktones.
Chicago, I know him.
Yeah, he plays harmonica and keyboards. Jerry Goodman from Mahavishnu Orchestra on violin. Oteil Burbridge on bass, and with me on drums. And that's a really unique jazz fusion album. So that was a very creative period from 1997 until 2005. The last one was with Ida Nesson, Anthony Jackson, and Dave Liebman, called Flashpoint. Okay. And that's another really powerhouse jazz fusion album.
Cool. It's very interesting. It kind of, like we were talking before, my introduction to your playing was through clinics. You know, but that was also my introduction to a lot of drummers in the 90s. It seemed like that was a thing, whether it was like Dennis or if it was Weckl. Were these companies financing this, or was it labels to like go out and advertise for their gear?
Labels.
Why were so many people doing clinics in the 90s, in like late 90s?
Oh, clinics, well, they'd been going on in the 80s too. Sure. And no record companies were involved with clinics. It was the drum and cymbal companies and drumstick companies. It was an music industry thing where if you had a drum shop or a music store and you wanted people to come in, let's have a drum clinic. Okay. And usually one or two of for me, it would be either Zildjian or Sonar would be paying for it, or a combination, Remo, Zildjian, Sonar, Vic Firth sticks, DW, bass drum pedals. So everyone would contribute a certain amount of money, and then the drummer would have their fee. The store would pick up the transportation in the hotel. Okay. So it was like a shared expense, and it was a very creative endeavor, and for the drummers. Like for me, I decided I wasn't going to play to any backing tracks, or like a lot of drummers played to backing tracks, and I took it as a challenge to play solo drum set. And to get my message across, like whatever the message happened to be at that clinic that year, whatever I was feeling was important as a message, but also I wanted to use it as an opportunity to play the drum set as a solo instrument. Okay. And that comes from, actually the roots of that for me is that I saw Max Roach a number of times, but the one time that really inspired me was, it was at SF Jazz, and I can't remember what year it was, but it was Max Roach solo concert with him and a drum set, all by himself.
Was it the thing where he did the brushes on the hi-hat?
He did everything.
Like just
Mr. Hi-Hat.
Okay.
Yeah, That's not brushes on a hi-hat, that's drumsticks.
A drumstick.
He did a thing with brushes on a snare drum, like he brought a snare drum down to the
Okay.
front of the stage. He played Mr. Hi-Hat, and he played all of his, or many of his compositions, the drum also waltzes for Big Sid, drums Unlimited, and he entertained like, must have been 1,000 people in the audience, and it was a complete musical experience. It was
Yeah.
pretty amazing. So that inspired me to learn those pieces. So I had the albums with those pieces on it. I learned them. I was playing them myself to learn his repertoire and to be able to play those in concert, in clinic. And then I came up with my own, inspired by that, my own drum set compositions. There's one story that I can tell you that happened, and there's a poster over there that has the date signed by Max, and it was, I have to look at the date, I think it was
98?
So he was doing a clinic at the Guitar Center in San Jose.
Oh, okay.
I know, it's kind of,
Random.
but Sid Thompson, he ran the drum department at the Guitar Center, he really wanted to get Max Roach to do a clinic and was able to organize it, probably through, I think it was through Zildjian. And he wanted me to introduce Max to the audience, which I said, okay, I'll do that. So before the Max's clinic, which was essentially him playing all of his solo pieces. It wasn't a clinic per se. It was a solo concert. It was billed as a clinic, but he didn't talk about anything technical. He just played the drums. But I sat back and told him, that I knew a lot of his repertoire, and he was very much a gentleman. But in the middle of his presentation, he stopped, and I was sitting in the front row, and he goes, well, today we're going to have a special guest play, Mr. Hi-Hat. And he handed me his drumstick.
Oh, wow.
So he had me come up, and he was like that, sitting like,
right, just like,
yeah.
all right,
And
do
I
this
played.
now.
Luckily, he didn't tell me ahead of time, so I didn't even get nervous. I just did it. And I did all this, some stick tricks and all this stuff. And his hi-hats were actually a little weird to play because he had two different size cymbals. The bottom cymbal was bigger
yeah,
than the
kind of
top
did it.
cymbal.
Yes, yes.
So it was a little awkward, and it was his sticks, which I have. I have the sticks.
Oh, he gave
I'll
them to
show
you.
you. And after it ended, he leaned over and goes, you added some shit to it.
Yes.
I said, yeah. But that was, that was pretty exciting to have that experience.
Well, I see some music on your stand there. Are
Yeah.
you working on anything? You got some coming up?
Yeah,
here,
we have
or-
we booked time in the studio to make a new Vital Information record with Manuel and Yannick.
Oh, so
We've
you've got
actually
it.
recorded 4 tunes already,
Oh, nice.
and we're going to go in and record a new, finish recording the next Vital Information album.
Nice. Well, thanks, Steve. It's great. Steve Smith, Vital Information. Time flies.